Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to oppose this bill, the Land Transport Amendment Bill. It's probably more aptly called the Road to Nowhere Bill. You could call it the put it on the credit card and pray for a brighter future bill. But I guess, mostly importantly for our national MPs who are all fired up now, many of them who do represent the regions, you could also call this the Regional Roadkill Bill. Because what this bill is doing is taking away regional decision-making, it's taking away regional autonomy, and it's basically saying that this government doesn't care about the regions. No, this government only cares about motorways in the big city. They only care about these uneconomic roads of so-called national party significance. All they care about is putting it on the credit card, borrowing more for these uneconomic roads. So I believe, Mr Speaker, it should be called the Regional Roadkill Bill. So, Mr Speaker, this bill, the Land Transport Management Bill, deals with transport planning and funding issues. It's a big deal, Mr Speaker, because the future of our economy, the future of our cities, the futures of our towns, the way that Kiwis get around, whether it's going to be more expensive or cheaper, faster or slower, stuck in gridlock or not, are key issues for our country, and the Greens have got solutions. Now, again, it was a very low-quality contribution we saw from the member from the Waikato, David Bennett, but I think he did touch on the change in heart we've seen under Labour. And I celebrate this, I congratulate this. Late in the last term, they did do some great things for transport, particularly in Auckland. I'd like to congratulate the Labour Party for the moves around electrification, double tracking in Wellington and Auckland. Good stuff, Mr Speaker. And I like to think the Labour Party's moved with the times, because the National Party, these guys, and it is all guys in the House today, these guys are stuck in the 1960s. They're stuck in a 1960s approach to transport, and we see this in this bill, which is all about removing local decision-making, putting more money on the credit card for motorways, and reducing regions' decisions-making ability. So, Mr Speaker, I'd first of all like to acknowledge the Select Committee process, thank all the submitters, thank the officials, thank the members of the Transport and Industrial Relations Select Committee. There were some improvements. I understand I didn't get the privilege to sit on the committee, Mr Speaker, but I understand there's a new clause 43A has been inserted. This is around the privacy concerns with tolling. This is something I talked about in the first reading speech based on concerns raised by the Privacy Commissioner. So good to see some solutions proposed and improvements to the legislation there. Other changes around regional public transport plans, the hierarchy making with the government policy statement on transport planning. But, let's get to the heart of this bill. What this bill is all about the government's motorway agenda. Now, I used to call Stephen Joyce, when I was the transport spokesperson for the Greens, the Colossus of Roads, but we've got Jerry Brownlee in the Transport Ministry now, and if there was a Colossus of Roads, there sure is with Jerry Brownlee. Now, what we see is this minister with considerable power, he's given a pantry which he's stocked with $20 billion worth of transport funding. The Transport Minister doesn't have to go off to the Finance Minister to get his spending approved. This minister's got a pantry stocked with $20 billion paid from the fuel excise tax and the diesel charges, Mr Speaker. And what we see is this government, they've totally cleaned out the pantry. The pantry is bare because they've spent it all on the roads of so-called national significance. The pantry is bare because they've spent it on the motorways, the transmission gullies, the uneconomic Puhoi to Wellsford. Mr Speaker, that's why, and as Darian Fenton points out, they're needing to borrow almost an extra $1 billion to fund the roads of national significance, the 7 motorways in the cities, Mr Speaker. So the agenda behind this bill is bad news because it doesn't even meet its own economic objectives. We know the benefit-cost ratios for half of them would get any national member laughed out of a business board meeting if they proposed to go borrow billions of dollars with benefit-cost ratios less than 1. Take transmission gully, independent estimates previously put that at 0.4. Puhoi to Wellsford, independent estimates put it at 0.7. So for every dollar, the national government is going and borrowing from New Zealanders, borrowing from the future. They're planning to lose 30 to 60 cents. Mr Speaker, they get laughed out of any business board meeting, but somehow they're doing it to our country. This government's removing the previous 5 transport objectives in the legislation, the affordability, integrated, safe, responsible and sustainable objectives. I don't know what the National Party's got against affordable, integrated, safe, responsible or sustainable, but obviously they've got some concerns with those points, Mr Speaker, which I think Kiwis would find surprising. The rationale behind this bill is tilting the balance of power as we make decisions on these key transport issues which shape our cities, towns and economy. We're seeing considerable and enhanced powers given to the Transport Minister. We're seeing consultation provisions being removed. We're even removing the non-voting members of regional transport committees. These are the people who sit on committees, do good work advocating for walking and cycling. It's a pretty hard job at the moment because the pantry's bare to be spent on these roads of uneconomic national significance. But the government's even getting rid of these people, standing up in their community, advocating for walking or cycling or public transport. The government's removing the regional fuel taxes. Now this is quite interesting because at the moment the government has the power of veto over any regional fuel tax, right at the moment. So what they're doing with this legislation is quite literally getting their foot on the floor, rubbing it in and making sure there's an impossibility of regional fuel taxes. It's disappointing because Auckland, obviously disappointed by the government's 1960s transport agenda, is setting out trying to provide solutions for their city. Solutions the city needs, like the CBD rail link, Mr Speaker. But what this government's doing is making it virtually impossible for them to be able to raise the funds themselves. There are other potential funding mechanisms which Auckland Council is investigating, considering, but this government's making it harder to see the transport solutions our city needs. What we're seeing, Mr Speaker, is an increasing borrowing under this legislation. Now, I think we should have an intelligent and considered debate around hypothecation of transport funding. I think there are some pros and cons. I mean, we're not going to see an intellectual, considered debate in this House under the national government, Mr Speaker, and the government benches. But we've got to have a conversation. Now, at the moment, the funding raised from fuel taxes on diesel and petrol is spent on roads, everything from public transport to road safety campaigns to policing, through to motorways, Mr Speaker. And what this government is saying is they're blowing the budget on the motorways, so they've got to borrow more to fund it. This is an incredible statement because over the National Land Transport Fund's 10-year funding horizon, which the government allocates through the government policy statement, they've got around $20 billion. Any other ministry would love to have a $20 billion kitty to play with over 10 years. But what this government's saying is they've blown it all and they need extra money. They need to put it on the credit card. Of course, there's an argument for borrowing, long-term borrowing to fund infrastructure investments across generations. But look, this should only be in the situation where the infrastructure investments make sense, have good business cases, have a good rationale. Now, the reason why the budget's blown out, of course, is because while they're off borrowing billions for these uneconomic motorways, what we've seen is road patronage flatten down. What we've seen is petrol prices up considerably over the last 5 years, and we've seen public transport go through the roof in the last 5 years, Mr Speaker. So we're seeing less funds in the National Land Transport Fund, so they have to go to the bank to borrow some more for the motorways. Mr Speaker, it's not a good way to run an economy. It's not a good way to plan for our cities. And New Zealanders stuck in traffic because they're not offering alternatives to ride or walk to work, catch a bus or train. Because those solutions aren't there, it's going to be the Aucklanders in congestion cursing the national government because what they're doing through this Put It On the Credit Card and Pray for a Brighter Future bill, the regional roadkill bill, Mr Speaker, isn't going to be providing the solutions our cities and towns need for the future. That's what the Green Party is doing, Mr Speaker. We've done it for a long time, and it's something we can continue to champion. And in government, Mr Speaker, we believe sooner rather than later, what you'll see a Green government doing is funding a fair contribution of the CBD rail link. We'll be seeing things like the light rail link in Wellington. We'll be trying to make public transport more affordable. Now, of course, this is going to help people get on the bus or safely cycle to work. It's also going to help those motorists, Mr Speaker, because the more people take in sustainable forms of transport, the more room there is on the roads for their taxis and the plumbers, as Michael Cullen fondly used to talk about. Mr Speaker, in summary, this is a bad bill, that's why we're opposing it. It's a 1960s approach to transport. I believe the Green Party is reflecting the future, the solutions this country needs, and I'm proud to be championing them in Parliament. Kia ora.
Mike Sabin.
Speaker, very pleased to take a call on this land transport management